Canadian Tire, where most things are made in China. I even checked. I think I found 4 or 5 items that were not made in China. Kind of one of the funny things of being an expat is that when you come back, the number one question they ask you is, when do you leave? And it's like, I just got back. What do you mean, when do I leave? I mean, I just got here. Let's take it slow here. Now, this time I did say I was going to be back for only a week, and then I ended up staying a bit longer just because I was meeting a lot of people. I was kind of sick for a couple weeks as well, and I figured I'd help out around the house with Mumsy. So, and I think it was a good idea to stay longer than I originally planned. Now, being back in Canada, I mean, people know I live in China and that I'm going to go back, and that I really have no intention of leaving just yet. Now, that's not to say that I wouldn't leave if I found another opportunity, if I had the chance, or quite possibly, I was thinking about this the other day, you know, if I had a kid, if I had dependents on me, I'm not sure if Beijing is really one of those places that you could raise a child affordably. Now, my hometown of Winnipeg is one of those places that you can. And I would almost say that a lot of people who choose to come to Canada look at the cost of living, or at least they used to, and say it's a lot cheaper than where they are from. So regardless of where they are from, the opportunity to make money in Canada and the opportunity to save that money in a variety of ways, registered accounts, tax-free savings accounts, and multiple ways of making money that are all regulated, like trading stocks, investment accounts, savings accounts. These things don't really exist in China. They don't exist in many parts of the world, or if they do, you're not sure if the financial institution is going to give you your money back. So in that regard, Canada, United States, parts of Europe, Britain, the UK, they're fantastic places to live, to make money, to save, and to raise a family. However, if you're ever from those places and you go traveling to places like China and Southeast Asia, you'll see that there isn't as much talk of things like politics and stuff. And I almost wonder if that's part and parcel of they just don't have time. Like, that's kind of what it comes down to. Here in Canada, since we have so many ways of making money, of making a living, of making passive income, even if it's just dividends and interest from the bank, you're not so worried about the next paycheck, so to speak. I know there are a lot of people who are living paycheck to paycheck. There are a lot of people, especially now, who are saying that the cost of living in Canada has increased substantially since COVID. I've even seen videos on YouTube now where immigrants to Canada are saying it's not what it once was. People, like, the cost of living has just gone up dramatically. The wages haven't kept pace. Now, in a situation like that, I look at China, I hear a similar complaint. I hear a similar complaint in that people say that the cost of living has gone up, yet wages haven't kept pace. But are there as many opportunities to make money in China without your direct involvement? Why would you move to China these days? I mean, adventure is one of them. To see the world from another point of view, that's another. To make money, they still are the manufacturing capital of the world. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. I guess it could change, but what would it take? I don't know. It'd be hard for me to even speculate what would remove the need or remove the ability of China to be manufacturing on such a large scale at such low prices. Not only that, I kind of wonder if a lot of the Chinese manufacturers are, mechanizing, but like more so, like robotization and stuff like that. So they're implementing more uses of robots, of AI technology, not to put people out of work, but to ensure that they can maintain their operations at a profitable margin. Because I'll tell you, even in China, but let's put it this way. My mom likes to shop at the dollar store. I was talking to a buddy about this, and like, you even mentioned that he goes to the dollar store. So the dollar store, where nothing costs $1, It all costs about 2 or 3. Imagine you could have access to a platform that made the stuff for the dollar store, and they were selling it online for cheaper than at the dollar store. That's China. Pinduoduo comes to mind. Temu's different. Taobao, you can buy things cheap. Jingdong, generally not so cheap, but at least when you buy something on Jingdong, the quality is typically better. So part of this trip has actually made me, given the fact that I guess I don't feel as much of a rush to go back to China just yet, much to my company's chagrin, you kind of wonder, I think back and I kind of wonder, why not Canada? Why China? The same way as like, why not China and why Canada? And it's right now, I'll tell you, but I'm not sure if this is age. I'm not sure if this is financial security in some regard. Don't get me wrong. It's not like I have $1 million in the bank and that if I stop working, I'd be fine. No, that's not the case at all. I got to keep on working. Hence the YouTube videos. But why Canada? Why China? Why not China? Why not Canada? Well, why not Canada? Why not my hometown? I don't think I'd move to any other city in Canada, possibly Vancouver, possibly Montreal, but I don't know anybody in Montreal. So I'd be starting again and there'd be no real reason to be there other than the fact that it's like, I like Montreal, which is a great city, but if I don't know the jobs, if I don't know the, what do you call it? Like the neighborhoods and stuff like that, it becomes one of these issues of, well, why would you move to Montreal if you don't have to, other than the fact that you just like the city? Likewise, Toronto, I mean, I guess there are more jobs in Toronto, but you wouldn't be living downtown Toronto for sure not. You'd be probably living farther outside. Vancouver, likewise. Now, Vancouver and Toronto have massive ESL micro industries, I guess you could call it. And the reason I call it micro is because simply compared to the volume that's available in places like India, China, Vietnam, those places, or any other place Korea even, Japan, where there is just a steady stream of people who are trying to learn English, even at the beginner's level. Whereas once you get to places like Canada, they probably already have a familiarity with it. So the amount that you could charge in Canada will be different than what you could charge in China. So that's one thing to consider in terms of, why don't you just do this job here in Canada rather than going overseas? I remember when I was doing the CELTA back in 2014, I guess, and they were talking about how much you could reasonably charge for an hour of tuition once you have the CELTA, and the number like $75 Canadian was seen to be a fair amount, although you could probably charge more given how much experience you had and how much sort of specialization you had as well. I remember thinking $75. I mean, times that by 5, you get the Chinese renminbi. So you're going closer to what, almost 400, 500 renminbi for an hour of tuition. Wow, that's a lot of money. But then you have to think, again, cost of living. How much is rent? How much is your electricity bill? How much is your technology bill? Like your cell phone, your connectivity and stuff like that. And the supplies that you would use to conduct the class. Regardless of utilities and stuff like that, because those things, life essentials, you can't put your life essentials on a student because you can leverage your skills are transferable. So if you know how to teach the present perfect, you can do that 10, 15 times, 100 times it doesn't change. Whereas one glass of water, once it's gone, it's gone. The idea being that you can reuse that teaching over and over again, but you can't reuse the utilities, so you can't put that on to someone when it's one use on your behalf. Is that a good example? Not sure. So in terms of like, why not Canada? Cost of living, and I don't mean even today's cost of living. I remember looking back in the old days, 10, 15 years ago, just going, it just doesn't make sense to stay here, work a corporate job, or even teach ESL here, because it didn't seem like there was enough volume. Now that might have changed over the years. I know the universities in Canada all have ESL programs, but typically those are run by people with masters in TESOL, so Master of Arts in teaching English as a second language, I guess it is. And so they they're all sessionals too. And by that, I mean, they don't have contract. They have semester or term by term contracts. They don't have longevity in their contracts, and there's really no seniority either. Is there benefits and stuff? I don't know. Whereas if you go, hello dog. Whereas if you go to a place like China, Korea, Japan, the contract often includes certain benefits. Now, I guess universities do have their basic core benefit package. But again, semester by semester or term by term. China, it would be 1 year. You do have to factor in the idea of you are displacing yourself. Foreign culture, foreign language. And it's in Canada the same way. Like if a company asks you to move, typically they pay for it. Now, China's not going to move all your stuff, but they might pay for the tickets over. And in terms of you living overseas as an expat, as a foreigner, there is a premium to be paid for that. Now, you know where else I hear this? Is in the incentive program for Canada to bring immigrants over. Lots of talk about this, how a lot of immigrants receive special treatment. They receive funding that local Canadian enterprises won't. And I understand this. Back in the early 2000s, I remember looking for a business loan, and I had no money. So my understanding was that you could go apply for, if you had a business plan and everything, if you worked that all out, you could find someone who would support your business with interest, of course, being paid, and then you can accumulate the money earn the money as you go. In order to secure the funding, you had to put up collateral. And I'm like, okay, well, so what type of collateral? It's like, well, do you have a house? I'm like, no. Do you have a bank account? I'm like, yeah. How much? Give them the number. They're like, well, then you could get that much money as a loan, as a funding. I'm going, so you just, wait a minute. You're going to give me the same amount of funding that's in my bank account. How does that make sense? Why don't I just spend the money on myself or on my own? So maybe that made more sense to them, didn't make sense to me. And it was at that point where I was even thinking like, well, what if I had a franchise or something, if I got into the franchising like Subway or McDonald's, Starbucks, etc., something along those lines. It just didn't make sense all of a sudden that I would have to have so much collateral in order to start a business in my hometown. So that idea did not work out. Now, that might just be my hometown. It could be different in parts of other parts of Canada. But that did contribute me to going, if it's not hard to start a business in Canada, because all you have to do is start a business. I mean, I'm in business, boom. Advertising, you can make deductions and credits and stuff like that. But as soon as you want funding, it gets a little bit more difficult. Buying a house was a lot easier than getting business funding 10, 15 years ago, as far as I remember. Now, to start a business in China, currently, I am told it will take 6 months to set up and cost 40,000 renminbi. Divide by 5, you get the Canadian. Divide by 7, you get the American dollars. Divide by 2, you get the British pound, I think. No. Divide by whatever the Canadian is, divide that by 2, and you get the British pounds. Goodness, so divide by 10. I guess that is, there you go. Good job, Stevie. But not only that, if you do start a business in China, and this is one reason I was kind of looking at this, I could sponsor my own visa. Whereas in Canada, if you are a sole proprietor, you can't sponsor anybody else. It's not like you can bring in over a whole team of Chinese or Filipino programmers and have them living in one apartment and just, yeah, they're all part of the business and you're a sole proprietor. I don't think that you can do that. Likewise, in China, basically what you're doing when you're spending 40,000 renminbi is setting up you're incorporating in China. Now you might be for this, you might be against this, you might not think it's a good idea. Doesn't really matter. There are lots of companies doing it. Let's put it that way. There are a lot of people doing it, and there are a lot of business foreigners, white people, black people, all sorts of people that are setting up businesses in China so that they can do business in China without needing a company to sponsor them except their own company. Now you might wonder, that's all great and good there, Stevie, but if you set up a business in China, do you need to speak Chinese? All of the companies that will help you set up a company in the mainland, they all speak English. That's not going to be an issue. The issue of setting up a company in China is the same as setting up a company here in Canada. Who are you serving? Who are your customers? What's the demand? How much can you charge for that demand or for your supplying that demand? So that doesn't change worldwide. That being said, there are some things that are probably easier to do in China than they would be in Canada. For example, import-export would probably be easier in China than it would be compared to Canada. I heart Winnipeg. There you go. Museum of Human Rights. So that's a pretty big deal here in Canada. It's a national museum. This is the downtown sort of area. Is that the Richardson building? That is the old TD building. I can't remember. So this would be Portage in Maine, which is one of the windiest intersections, the most windiest intersection in North America. And that's so that Portage in Maine area. The museum would be at the Forks, and that's right beside Portage in Maine, which is pretty much downtown Winnipeg. And so one of the reasons I was sort of thinking about making this video, this little walk and talk here, is basically to ask the question, like, what would make you leave where you are now? Is there a place that you have thought about, read about, or even studied that you're kind of like, wouldn't it be cool to live there? And are you leaving where you are from just because of money, or are you leaving because you're like, hey, it'd be kind of neat to go live in whatever place it is? China, Korea, Thailand, Ghana, Uruguay, etc. Places like that. I would actually say, of all things, I think the biggest reason why people move is because that'd be cool to do that. Not even necessarily because of the money. And the money might be one thing, but I think it's because you'd be like, hey, that'd be so cool if I could go live over there for a little while to see how people live over there. Now, this is not something that would apply to everybody. I think some people do actually have to leave their hometowns for other reasons. But again, I guess I'm speaking more for the people who are looking at it and going, why would someone ever leave their hometown? Why would someone ever leave where they're born and move across the world to a place where they don't speak the language? Like, why would you do that to yourself? Especially when you consider something like a place like Canada with the registered retirement savings plans, the RRSPs, the retirement plans and stuff like that. Not just the pensions, but the retirement plans. Those are pretty well instantiated here in Canada. Places like China, you're not going to get that. You might get some expat packages from big companies or big banks that will do it, but those have even gone down recently. Will they come back? Probably. I'm suspecting they will. But for the basic English teacher, the ESL teacher, the ESL classroom teacher who just wants to go gap year or travel for a little bit, I think the whole idea, I mean, it is something that you have to consider. It's not such a big deal when you're in your 20s, possibly even in your early 30s. But when you get into your 40s, and if you haven't made those savings just yet, boy, things can get... You start looking at job opportunities a little bit differently. You also start looking at cost of living a little bit differently. Anyway, I know I've been talking a lot about money, but this is one of the things that kind of makes you go, well, why not Canada? Why not China? Well, why China and why Canada? Like literally those four questions, you can't ask them separately because it's you. In order to go, well, why would you go to China? Why don't you stay in Canada? So there's a positive and a negative. Well, why would you stay in Canada? Why would you stay in China? Well, could you go somewhere else? I like to say that the Middle East is the ESL teacher retirement home because that's where they typically need someone who, or people who have not just the degrees, but then extensive experience and then the willingness not to fight the system because your students are probably going to have more money than you are. So you might have to tone down your ambitions to have an experimental classroom, let's put it that way. What is this? That's the first time I've ever seen that. So why not China? Try it out. Ignore the news. I think that's the big thing. That you really do have to not... You can read about the safety issues and stuff like that, but in terms of people's opinions on how the society runs, get rid of that. Don't bother. Likewise with Canada, you can't be depending on the news to sort of think that you're going to get a good idea of like how Canadians actually live. It's cold outside. You got to move. You got to stay indoors. You got to dress warm, and you got to work your job so you can keep the lights on. That's what's going to happen. Talking about politics, yeah, on break time when you have the time, not when you're busy working. If Canada's so bad, why don't I go to the States? If the States is so bad, why don't I go to Europe or Australia? Australia would be easier to get to. Europe is a little bit more difficult in order to get visas, especially if you are an old guy like me in your 40s. Generally, countries stop offering the working traveler visa, which is usually up to about 35. Maybe some countries have gone 40. I don't think so, though. I think topmost is usually 35. So overall, why not Canada? I guess one other thing I have to consider is that I've always kind of considered myself to be more valuable, not just to myself, not just to my family, but also to my hometown and to Canada, being outside of the country. And by that I mean my willingness to go overseas, to learn different languages, to put up with some of the inconveniences and the safety concerns as well by traveling. If not just by backpacking or traveling through the different places and making these videos, but then also by working. And I'll tell you, I mentioned this in one of the shorts that I published just recently about Herodotus. And one thing I didn't really mention in that video is that although Herodotus was willing to have a conversation, in the modern world especially, if you don't like the place, you can always come back. You're not locked into a place. Number two, you can make money in most places. And yes, you do have to have a valid passport and get visas and stuff like that, but you can make money and you can send it home. You can make enough money, not just for living, but you can also make it for saving as well. And you can spend that savings anywhere in the world because currencies, wonderfully, are convertible. So to be able to work alongside the working people was another grand ambition of mine when I was a young man. It doesn't seem like so long ago yet. When you say that you're over 40, people go looking and go, wow, you're an old man. So all that being said, I'm kind of looking at it going, well, yeah, why not China? Well, why not Canada? Why China? Why Canada? Well, why not somewhere else? Could I go somewhere else? I look at the money, though, these days. I look in terms of interest. There is one place I'd like to go, West Africa. I'd love to go there at some point, but my research has sort of shown that to make money in West Africa, very difficult. You can as an ESL teacher, but you're not making scads of cash like you would in places like China, Korea, or Japan, which have been the big three over the last 2 or 3 decades in terms of ESL tuition. Yes, dog, I hear you. I hear you, dog. All right, folks, well, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for watching. If you haven't done so already, if you want to see more videos like this, hit that subscribe button and I'll be sure to keep on posting them. I consider these to be my walk and talks. So I just kind of turn on the camera and discuss some things that are on my mind in regard to living life overseas, both the pros and the cons. If you like this video, give it a like. It helps tell the YouTube algo that I'm doing good work and it pushes it out to other people. And if you have any questions, concerns, comments, drop them in the comment section below. And I'll try to answer them to the best of my abilities. Why China? Why not China? Why Canada? Why not Canada? What do you think? Let me know. I'd be interested. And so would this guy. Elf man. Appreciate it. We'll do this again. Have a good one. Bye-bye.